Picture the shock when a guy with a toy badge struts onto my porch, declaring, "You're under arrest." By the HOA, no less. And yes, I wish I were joking. Turns out, my cabin supposedly broke so many fabricated rules that they sent this pretend cop to rattle me. And the best part, he looked like he'd raided a costume bin for that uniform. But here's the twist: this pint-sized HOA drama didn't know what they were up against with my cabin. Want to see how far one HOA queen will push before it all spectacularly backfires? Hit the comments if your HOA's ever gone off the rails, especially with handcuffs that aren't even real, because this story's about to take off. It all kicked off 3 weeks earlier when I snagged this slice of paradise in Pine Ridge, a cozy mountain community about 2 hours outside Denver. After 20 years as one of Colorado's top attorneys, where I once grilled a hedge fund CEO into a full confession before the jury even finished lunch, I'd finally decided to ditch the briefcase for a peaceful retirement. After decades of high-stakes legal battles, I craved tranquility and a low profile. When I signed the papers for this cabin, I pictured quiet mornings with my late wife's dog snoozing by the fire. I didn't anticipate a clipboard war breaking out by day 3. The cabin was perfect: rustic wood exterior, stone fireplace, and a view that melted all my worries away. Or so I thought. I'd kept my legal past under wraps, simply telling neighbors I was retired without spilling the details, little realizing that flying under the radar would nearly be my downfall. Then, on my 3rd day, Patricia Dorsey showed up, and from the moment she stepped onto my porch, something felt off. She was a woman in her late 30s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of rigid posture that screamed middle management. She moved like a regional manager on a power trip. Clipboard frown, and all that clipboard of hers was covered in handwritten notes that looked more like a high school assignment than official documentation. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, settling into my porch chair like she owned it, "I need to discuss some serious violations with your property." The way she said serious made it sound like I'd committed war crimes instead of just moved into a mountain cabin. What struck me immediately was how she seemed to know an awful lot about my cabin for someone who was supposed to be managing the entire community. She paraded around my yard like a building inspector: grass, too tall; paint, too rustic; porch, light off-center. Everything was wrong, according to her. Out of habit, my watch's mic was on. "Just in case this cabin is in the prime location," she said, standing back and surveying my home like a general planning a battle strategy. "It's going to be the showcase property for our entire community transformation. I'll help you understand exactly what that means." The way she said help sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the Colorado mountain air. As Patricia continued her inspection, I noticed she had this habit of making little check marks on her clipboard the same way an elementary school teacher grades papers. She'd look at something, frown, then scribble notes with a red pen. The Pine Ridge Homeowners Association has very specific standards, she explained, her voice taking on a lecturing tone. "We're working to make this community a model of mountain living excellence. Your cabin, being centrally located, will serve as our demonstration property." I asked what she meant by demonstration property, and her smile was the kind you see on a shark before it attacks. "Oh, you'll understand soon enough, Mr. Mitchell. Change is coming to Pine Ridge, and your cabin is going to be at the center of it all." Something about Patricia's demeanor reminded me of cases I'd worked on over the years, that particular combination of false authority and barely contained aggression that usually meant trouble. She spoke about the HOA like she was running a major corporation, but I'd done my homework before. Buying the cabin Pine Ridge was supposed to be a simple mountain community with minimal restrictions, not some heavily regulated development. As she continued her inspection, I made mental notes of everything she said, a habit that had served me well in my legal career. Patricia had no idea that she was dealing with someone who'd spent 2 decades learning to spot fraud, manipulation, and abuse of power from a mile away. The conversation took an even stranger turn when Patricia started asking personal questions about my finances and living situation. Are you planning to live here full-time, Mr. Mitchell? Do you have family who might be visiting regularly? What's your background? Are you familiar with community regulations? Her questions felt more like an interrogation than neighborly small talk. I kept my answers vague, sticking to my story about being simply retired, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was clearly sizing me up, trying to figure out if I was someone who would fight back or roll over. Patricia Dorsey was about to learn that she'd picked the wrong person to mess with. 3 hours after Patricia left, I found my first violation notice stuck to my front door. The heading read, Official Pine Ridge HOA. Violation notice in bold letters, and the content was so absurd I had to read it 3 times. Violation of Natural Light Ordinance. Severity level, critical. I stood there in my doorway, coffee mug in hand, wondering how sunlight could possibly be illegal. This was just the beginning of what would become the most bizarre battle of my retirement, a battle that would end with Patricia Dorsey in handcuffs and me finally getting the peace I'd been looking for. The violation notice in my hand was like something from a fever dream. According to Patricia's official-looking document, I was guilty of non-compliance with approved cabin color schemes in snow, adjacent environments, irregular grass pathway elevation standards, and my personal favorite, failure to illuminate porch fixtures at precisely 6 p.m. daily. The total fine was $8.500 due within 7 days, or I'd face escalated enforcement measures back in court. I'd see forged wills, fake deeds, even fabricated contracts worth millions. But Patricia's red pen HOA manifesto was something else. A suburban dictator with a middle school teacher's flair. The whole thing looked like it had been typed up on a home computer, complete with spelling errors and formatting that screamed, "I learned Microsoft Word yesterday." When I called Patricia to discuss these ridiculous charges, her response was exactly what I expected from someone drunk on imaginary power. "Mr. Mitchell, I don't need to explain Pine Ridge regulations to you. I am the HOA here, and these rules exist for the good of our community." She said it like a villain in a Shakespeare play, chin up, eyes blazing, ready for curtain call. I asked to see the official HOA charter and bylaws, thinking I'd humor her little game before pointing out the obvious problems with her authority. "I don't need paperwork to validate my position," she said, with the confidence of someone who'd never been challenged. "I am the law here, and you'll follow my rules or face the consequences." That's when I knew I was dealing with someone who'd completely lost touch with reality. Every sentence was improv rules she made up mid-conversation. Confidence, not competence. When I asked about the other board members, she laughed. "Board members, Mr. Mitchell. I am the entire board. Pine Ridge HOA is a streamlined organization." She said I am the board, but real HOAs need elections records oversight. She had none, just ego. What Patricia was describing wasn't an HOA at all. It was a dictatorship with delusions of grandeur. I started recording our phone conversation on my cell phone, a habit I developed during my legal career when dealing with unreliable witnesses. Her rulebook had a copy watermark and Comic Sans. The rules sounded like they came from someone binge-watching property TV shows. Grass walkways must maintain consistent elevation variance of no more than 2 in, and porch lighting must achieve optimal ambient illumination between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. I dealt with plenty of fraudulent documents in my career, but this was so amateur-ish, it was almost charming. What really gave Patricia away was her teaching background. She couldn't help but use that red pen to grade everything around her, and her lecturing tone was straight out of a classroom. During our conversation, she kept referring to proper procedures and compliance standards like she was still managing a school office. I did a quick internet search and found exactly what I was looking for. Patricia Dorsey had been terminated from her position as an administrative assistant at the local school district for exceeding authority boundaries and inappropriate control over staff and procedures. If HOA fraud had a teacher's lounge, she'd be the faculty head apparently. She'd tried to reorganize the entire school system from her desk, creating new policies and procedures that had no official backing. Sound familiar? The genius of Patricia's scheme was targeting a small community like Pine Ridge with only 8 cabins total. She could easily position herself as the sole authority figure without anyone questioning her credentials. Most residents were part-time mountain home owners who didn't want to deal with neighborhood politics. They'd probably just pay whatever fines she imposed rather than fight back. Patricia had figured out how to recreate the authority and control she'd lost at her previous job, and she was going to milk it for everything it was worth. Unfortunately for her, she'd just picked a fight with someone who'd spent 20 years dismantling exactly these kinds of power trips. By the end of our phone call, I had enough recorded evidence to prove Patricia was running a fraudulent operation. Colorado law says an HOA must have 3 board members, regular elections, not just one person making up rules. But I decided to let her dig herself deeper before playing my cards. Ms. Dorsey, I said, keeping my voice calm and reasonable, I appreciate your dedication to the community, but I'm going to need some time to review these regulations and understand my options. The silence on the other end of the line was golden. Patricia clearly expected me to either pay up immediately or storm off in frustration. She had no idea she was dealing with someone who'd made a career out of patience and preparation. Patricia's response was everything I had hoped for and more. Mr. Mitchell, I've been more than patient with you. I gave you a final opportunity to comply voluntarily, but I can see you're going to be difficult. Starting tomorrow, you'll discover just how much real power I have in this community. Her voice had that cold, threatening quality that usually meant someone was about to do something spectacularly stupid. I thanked her for her time and hung up, then sat back in my chair with a satisfied smile. Patricia Dorsey had just made the same mistake that countless criminals had made in my courtroom over the years. She'd underestimated her opponent and overplayed her hand. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting indeed. The next morning I woke up to complete darkness. Not the gentle darkness of a mountain sunrise, but the kind of darkness that only comes When your electricity has been cut off, I fumbled for my phone's flashlight and made my way to the kitchen, where I discovered that my water had been shut off too. Patricia Dorsey had made good on her threat, and she'd done it with the efficiency of someone who'd clearly planned this move well in advance. When I called the electric company, they told me that the Pine Ridge HOA had requested service termination due to serious violations of community standards. The water company gave me the same story. Patricia had somehow convinced these utility companies that she had the authority to cut off services to homes in violation of HOA rules. You'd think utility companies would ask for proper documentation before cutting off paying customers. But apparently Patricia's authoritative phone manner was enough to fool them completely. No heat, no light, no water. It was 20, outside and inside. My cabin felt like a meat locker. I melted snow in pots just to make coffee cooking more like surviving. The fireplace was my stove, my lifeline, and my only friend. I brushed my teeth with melted snow, shaved with a hunting knife, and heated soup cans like I was in a war bunker. The irony wasn't lost on me after decades of working in climate-controlled offices and courtrooms. Here I was living like a pioneer because of one woman's power fantasy. But if Patricia thought this would drive me away, she'd seriously underestimated my stubbornness. A photo of my late wife stared back from the mantel. I could almost hear her voice. "You sure this mountain life's peaceful, Jim?" I'd promised her. I'd rest, not wage war, but Patricia had other plans. The visual of me sitting by my fireplace, turning a hand-cranked generator to charge my phone, probably looked like something from a disaster movie. But that little generator became my lifeline to the outside world, and I used every bit of battery power to document Patricia's escalating campaign of harassment. I recorded video of my dark cabin, took photos of my empty water faucets, and compiled every piece of evidence I could gather. Patricia might have temporarily inconvenienced me, but she was also providing me with a perfect case study in criminal harassment and fraud. Every day without power was another day of evidence that would eventually bury her. I was cut off, not just from power and water, but from reason. Each hour without heat wasn't just cold, it was insult. I'd prosecuted crime syndicates. Now I was losing to a woman with a clipboard. On my second day without utilities, I got the breakthrough I'd been hoping for. Using my phone's internet connection, I researched Patricia's background more thoroughly and found a treasure trove of information. She'd been fired from the school district, not just for exceeding her authority, but for creating fake administrative policies and trying to collect fees from teachers for violating regulations she'd invented. The pattern was identical to what she was doing at Pine Ridge, creating false authority, inventing rules, and using intimidation to extract money from victims. Patricia Dorsey was a serial scammer who'd found a new hunting ground in our little mountain community. The psychological profile was textbook narcissistic personality disorder mixed with a desperate need to regain control after her professional humiliation. Patricia couldn't handle being a nobody, so she'd created a scenario where she could be the ultimate authority figure. Again, the Pine Ridge HOA scam wasn't just about money. It was about feeding her ego and proving to herself that she could still boss people around. She'd picked Pine Ridge because it was small and isolated, with mostly part-time residents who wouldn't fight back. But she'd made one critical error in judgment. She'd assumed that everyone would be as passive and compliant as her previous victims. The cold was brutal, But the real challenge was the isolation. Patricia had managed to turn my dream retirement into a survival exercise. And I'd be lying if I said there weren't moments when I considered just packing up and leaving. But then my phone would buzz with another threatening text from Patricia, and my resolve would harden again. Weather's getting cold out there. Mr. Mitchell, you'll be leaving soon enough. Read her message at 11 p.m. Mill, on my third night without power, the frozen face emoji was a nice touch. Nothing says serious legal authority like a smiley face and a threatening text message. That text message was Patricia's biggest mistake yet. In my legal career, I'd seen plenty of criminals who couldn't resist gloating about their crimes, and Patricia had just joined their ranks. Her message was clear evidence of intentional harassment, and the timing showed premeditation. She was actively monitoring my situation and taking pleasure in my discomfort. I screenshot the message and added it to my growing file of evidence. Patricia thought she was twisting the knife, but she was actually putting the final nail in her own coffin sometimes. The best thing about dealing with criminals is that they just can't help themselves. They always have to gloat. For the first time in 3 days, I smiled. Patricia Dorsey had no idea that she'd just handed me the smoking gun I needed to destroy her. The fourth day without power, I decided it was time to involve the real authorities. I called the Summit County Sheriff's Department with what I thought was a clear-cut case of fraud, harassment, and extortion. I had recordings, text messages, and documented evidence of Patricia's fake HOA scheme. Surely this would be enough to shut down her operation and restore my utility. The deputy who took my call listened patiently as I explained the situation, then delivered the news that made my blood run cold. Sir, this is a neighbor issue. The deputy said, not our jurisdiction. Not their jurisdiction. She shut off my heat in a Colorado winter. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Here was a woman who'd created a fake organization, was extorting money from residents, and had illegally manipulated utility companies to cut off services, and the police were treating it like a neighborly disagreement over fence lines. Deputy, I said, trying to keep my frustration in check. This isn't the legitimate HOA. She's made the whole thing up. She's running a scam. The deputy's response was professionally polite, but ultimately useless. You'll need to sue her in civil court or report to the state's HOA complaints office. I once prosecuted a banker who faked $80 million in collateral. The state pounced, but a fake HOA shuts off my water and gets a pat on the head. The irony of being told to hire an attorney wasn't lost on me, but revealing my background at this point would have complicated things unnecessarily. 2 hours later, I watched from my cabin window as a sheriff's department patrol car pulled up to my driveway. My heart jumped. Maybe they decided to take my complaint seriously after all. But when the 2 deputies got out, I could tell from their body language that this wasn't going to go the way I'd hoped. They knocked on my door with the weary attitude of cops who'd been sent to handle a nuisance call. Mr. Mitchell, we're here about your complaint regarding your neighbor. Patricia Dorsey, the lead deputy, was a middle-aged man with kind eyes who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. We've reviewed your statements, and while we understand your frustration, there's no criminal activity we can address here. For 20 years, I was the jurisdiction. Now I'm a footnote in someone's lunch break. They nodded politely, then told me to play nice. I wanted to scream she'd conned everyone, and now they were treating me like the crazy Neighbor Mr. For Mitchell, we've spoken with Miss Dorsey, and she's provided documentation showing she's the elected HOA representative. For Pine Ridge, this appears to be a legitimate community dispute that needs to be resolved through proper channels. I wanted to scream that Patricia's documentation was as fake as her authority, but I could see these officers had already made up their minds. They were treating this like a routine neighbor dispute, not the sophisticated fraud operation it actually was. The most infuriating part was watching Patricia emerge from her cabin during the deputy's visit, playing the role of concerned community leader to perfection. She approached the patrol car with the confident stride of someone who'd been expecting this visit, carrying a folder of official documents. She clutched a folder like it was the Declaration of Independence, waving it like proof of sainthood. Officers, I'm so glad you're here. Mr. Mitchell has been very hostile about complying with our community standards. I've tried to work with him, but he's been increasingly aggressive and threatening. The performance was Academy Award worthy. She managed to sound both professional and slightly afraid, like a dedicated public servant dealing with an unreasonable resident. I watched from my window as Patricia chatted with the deputies, occasionally glancing toward my cabin with what looked like genuine concern. She'd handed them her fake documents, and from there, nodding and note-taking. It was clear they were buying her story completely. When they finally approached my door to wrap up their visit, I could see the change in their demeanor. They were no longer treating me like a victim of fraud. They were treating me like a problem resident who needed to be managed. Mr. Mitchell, we strongly encourage you to work with Miss Dorsey to resolve this situation amicably. Community disputes can escalate quickly, and we'd hate to see this get out of hand. As I watched the patrol car disappear down the mountain road, I felt more alone than I had since my wife died. For 2 decades, I was the system. Now it was shrugging at my doorstep like I didn't exist. The system I had spent 20 years working within had completely failed me, and I was facing Patricia's escalating harassment with no official support whatsoever. For the first time since this nightmare began, I seriously considered packing up and leaving. Maybe Patricia was right. Maybe I was just a stubborn old man who couldn't accept that times had changed. But then I remembered the photo on my mantle and the career I'd built on never backing down from bullies. Patricia Dorsey had won this round, but the game was far from over. That evening, I sat by my fireplace with a battery-powered lantern, opened my old leather briefcase, and pulled out my legal reference books. The deputies might not have been able to help me, but they'd inadvertently given me valuable information. Patricia had convinced them she was legitimate, which meant she had some kind of documentation that looked official. I needed to understand exactly what she was claiming and find the flaws in her story. 20 years of legal experience was about to come out of retirement, and Patricia Dorsey had no idea what kind of storm she'd just unleashed. On my 7th day without power, I was sitting by my fireplace trying to coax some warmth from the dying embers when I heard a car door slam outside through my window. I could see a police cruiser in my driveway, and my heart started racing. Had the deputies changed their minds about Patricia's fraud? But as the figure approached my door, something felt off. The uniform looked right, but the walk was wrong, too casual, too uncertain. When he knocked, it sounded more like a nervous teenager than a confident law enforcement officer. Mr. Mitchell, I'm Officer Tommy Dorsey with Summit County Sheriff's Department. I have a warrant for your arrest. He said warrant like he'd learned the word yesterday. The moment I opened the door, I knew something was seriously wrong. The man standing on my porch was probably in his early 30s, stocky, built with the kind of nervous energy that screamed amateur hour. The badge was crooked, the belt Halloween quality. His hands trembled like a rookie actor. "Officer Dorsey," I said, noting the familiar last name, "could I see your identification and badge?" Number. Tommy's response confirmed my suspicions. Real cops don't hesitate when asked for identification. They flip out their badge automatically. But Tommy fumbled around like he was looking for his wallet, finally producing a badge that looked like it came from a party store. "Ah, yeah, sure, badge number. Let me check." He actually had to look at his own badge to read the number, which was clearly printed on a piece of tape. I dealt with enough law enforcement officers in my career to know that they know their badge numbers by heart. This guy was about as legitimate as Patricia's HOA documentation. The arrest warrant was even more amateurish than Patricia's violation notices. It was printed on regular copy paper in Times New Roman font with official-sounding language that had obviously been copied from some legal website. "Mr. James Mitchell, you are hereby under arrest for obstruction of HOA enforcement activities and threatening community." "Should look like Officer Dorsey," I said, maintaining my composure. "This is quite a serious matter. Would you mind if I offered you some coffee while we discuss this?" Tommy's confusion at my hospitality was priceless. Real criminals don't offer refreshments to arresting officers, but Tommy was clearly working from a script that didn't include social niceties. I guess that would be okay, but I really need to arrest you." He said arrest like he was asking permission, not issuing a command. I invited him to sit on my porch and went inside to get coffee, using the opportunity to start recording on my phone. When I returned, Tommy was examining his handcuffs like he'd never seen them before, which he probably hadn't. "These are interesting. Handcuffs, Officer Dorsey. Are they the new model? I've never seen ones quite like these." The conversation that followed was a masterclass in how not to impersonate a police officer. Tommy couldn't answer basic questions about police procedure, didn't know how to properly read someone their rights, and kept referring to me as Sir and Mr. Mitchell instead of using proper arrest terminology. When I asked about his police vehicle, he pointed to what was obviously a rental car with temporary police decals that were already starting to peel off. The whole setup was so amateurish, it was almost endearing, like watching a middle schooler try to forge a hall pass. "Officer Dorsey," I said, taking photos of his warrant with my phone, "I need to send this to my attorney. I hope you don't mind. It's such a unique document." The breakthrough came when Tommy made a critical slip. Dispatch told me I had to arrest you today. Introduced himself as Officer Dorsey, that he was related to Patricia, but having him accidentally confirm it was better than I'd hoped. "Your mother must be very proud of your law enforcement career," I said innocently. "How long have you been with the sheriff's department?" Tommy's face went white as he realized his mistake. She's not. Dispatch is just." Tommy's eyes darted to the door. His fingers clutched the cuffs on his belt like a lifeline. "Please, don't call the real cops," he whispered. "Mom said it was just a scare tactic." His voice cracked. That's when I knew he wasn't a villain, just a pawn. I continued the charade for another 20 minutes, asking Tommy increasingly specific questions about police procedures. While he dug himself deeper into obvious lies, he claimed to be a 5-year veteran but didn't know basic radio codes, he said. He'd graduated from the police academy, but couldn't name which one. Most damning of all, he kept checking his phone for text messages, clearly getting instructions from someone, probably Patricia, about how to handle the situation. By the time I finally revealed that I knew he was fake, I had enough recorded evidence to send both him and his mother to prison for a very long time. Tommy, I said, my voice taking on the tone I used to use in courtrooms, do you know what the penalty is for impersonating a police officer? His face crumpled like a child who'd been caught stealing cookies. I'm sorry, Mr. Mitchell, I didn't want to do this, but to my ears, Patricia had finally crossed the line from petty harassment into serious criminal activity, and her son was about to learn that there are consequences for helping Mom with her criminal schemes. Tommy, I said, gently setting my coffee down, we both know this badge is plastic, and that warrant is worthless. He slumped back into the porch chair. He whispered, she said if I didn't scare you off, I'd be out of the house. Nowhere to go. There was shame in his voice, but more than that, fear not of the law, but of his mother. I'd once watched a gang informant break like this. Same shaking hands, same look of betrayal burned in. I've screwed up my whole life, Mr. Mitchell. But this is criminal. I leaned forward. Maybe it is, but it's also your shot at doing something right. The moment Tommy called Patricia Mom, I knew I had them both exactly where I wanted them, but instead of revealing my hand immediately, I decided to let the situation play out a little longer. Tommy was clearly in over his head, and panic makes people say things they shouldn't. The relief that washed over his face was almost heartbreaking. Here was a young man who'd been roped into his mother's criminal scheme and was clearly desperate to get out of it. No, sir, I'm not. I'm really sorry about all this. Mom said it would just be a quick thing to scare you into leaving. I spent the next hour getting Tommy's full confession, and the story that emerged was both pathetic and infuriating. Patricia had been planning this fake police visit for weeks, ordering a costume online and coaching Tommy on what to say. She'd convinced him that I was some kind of troublemaker who was ruining the community and needed to be taught a lesson. Tommy had a history of minor legal troubles, mostly check, fraud, and fake identification. Me out of her house, and I'd have nowhere to go. He explained, his voice breaking with emotion. The more Tommy talked, the clearer it became that Patricia had been running similar scams throughout the community. She'd convinced at least 3 other families to move away by using various forms of harassment and intimidation. The fake HOA notices were just the beginning. She'd also filed false complaints with code enforcement, manipulated utility companies, and even hired people to make noise complaints against her targets. Tommy provided me with text messages, emails, and recorded phone calls that painted a picture of systematic fraud and harassment. Patricia Dorsey wasn't just a neighborhood bully. She was a sophisticated criminal who'd been operating under the radar for years. Tommy, I said after he'd finished his confession, I need you to understand something very important. What you and your mother have done isn't just illegal. It's serious criminal behavior that could land both of you in prison. For years I watched his face go pale as the reality of his situation sank in. But I'm willing to help you if you're willing to help me stop your mother before she hurts anyone else. Tommy nodded eagerly, clearly desperate for any way out of the mess he'd gotten himself into. What do you need me to do, Mr. Mitchell? I'll do anything to make this right. The plan I outlined was simple but effective. Victory, Patricia's ego and need for control, would make it impossible for her to resist showing up to gloat when she arrived. I'd have my phone recording everything, and with any luck, she'd incriminate herself completely. But won't she be suspicious when she sees I'm not actually under arrest? Tommy asked. I smiled and explained that we'd staged the scene to make it look like he was in control. Your mother wants to see me defeated, Tommy. We're going to give her exactly what she wants to see. I moved the heavy coffee table aside, brought in 2 chairs, set my phone on the mantel angled perfectly. The overhead lantern buzzed with weak light, just enough to cast shadows under Patricia's eyes. All we were missing was a dangling light bulb. And a bad cop, good cop routine looks like an interrogation room, Tommy said nervously. I smiled. That's exactly what it is. And your mom is about to confess to a whole season's worth of felonies. While Tommy made the call to his mother, I was busy setting up my own backup plan. I used my phone to send a detailed email to an old detective friend from my attorney days who worked with the state attorney general's office. I attached all the evidence I'd gathered, including the recordings of Patricia's admissions, photos of the fake documents, and Tommy's confession. I need a favor. I'm dealing with a systematic fraud operation, and I need someone with real authority standing by when I spring my trap within 30 minutes. My friend had responded with the location of the nearest under arrest. He wants to talk about selling the cabin and leaving Pine Ridge. I could hear one chilling phrase. Tell him I want the keys and the deed. No signature, no mercy. Yeah, he's really scared now. He keeps asking about the charges and whether he'll go to jail. I think you should come over here and talk to him yourself. The hook was set. Patricia's need to personally humiliate her victims was going to be her downfall. Patricia's SUV crunched into the driveway like a shark cutting through snow. I watched from behind the curtain. She stepped out, heel boots tapping with triumphant rhythm, a leather briefcase in one hand, and victory written all over her face. Tommy swallowed hard. She's going to kill me. Not today, I whispered. Today she kills her own case. 20 minutes later, I watched through my window as Patricia's car pulled into my driveway. She was practically bouncing with excitement as she walked toward my cabin carrying what looked like a briefcase full of documents. This was her moment of triumph, the culmination of weeks of harassment and manipulation. She had no idea that she was walking into the trap that would end her criminal career. Tommy and I took our positions, him standing nervously by the door with his fake handcuffs, me sitting in a chair with my phone recording everything. Remember, Tommy, I whispered, just follow my lead. Your mother is about to confess to everything. Patricia burst through my door like a conquering general, her face glowing with satisfaction. Well, Mr. Mitchell, it looks like you finally learned your lesson. She surveyed the scene with obvious pleasure, taking in Tommy's official stance. In my apparent defeat, I told you I had real power in this community, didn't I? Now you're going to sell that cabin to me at the price I set, and you're going to disappear from Pine Ridge forever. She was so caught up in her moment of triumph that she didn't notice my phone recording every word. Patricia Dorsey was about to learn that pride really does come before the fall. Finally, Patricia announced, stepping inside like Caesar into Rome. She entered like she was on a real estate reality show. Finale, heels, smile, and delusion in full stride. This cabin mine, you done. She threw the papers on my coffee table like she was issuing a royal decree. Sign here, here, and here. You'll get 70 grand, and I'll forget the violations. I stayed seated, letting her bask. She even pulled out her phone for a photo. Say goodbye to Pine Ridge, Mr. Mitchell. I stood, smile, Patricia. You're on camera, and the only thing leaving Pine Ridge today is your reputation. Patricia's entrance into my cabin was everything I'd hoped for and more. She strutted through the door like a victorious general, briefcase in hand, ready to claim her prize. She looked around the cabin with the satisfaction of someone who just acquired a new piece of property. This is going to make... I almost laughed out loud. My cabin was worth at least twice that amount, but Patricia was so drunk on her perceived victory that she thought she could dictate whatever term she wanted. The performance that followed was a masterclass in criminal overconfidence. Patricia opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents that she'd clearly prepared in advance. I have the sale contract right here, along with the official HOA transfer paperwork. Once you sign these, all your violations will be forgiven and you can leave Pine Ridge with a clean record. She spread the papers across my coffee table like she was conducting a legitimate real estate transact. Of course, there will be some additional fees for the administrative costs of your arrest and the processing of your violations, but I'm sure you understand that these things cost money. I let Patricia continue her victory speech for several more minutes, making sure my phone captured every word of her confession. She admitted to creating the fake HOA, described her method for manipulating utility companies, and even bragged about her previous success in driving other residents away. You're not the first person who thought they could challenge my authority, Mr. Mitchell, but you're certainly the most stubborn. I've helped 3 other families realize that Pine Ridge wasn't the right fit for them. The casual way she described her systematic harassment was chilling. This wasn't just a power trip. It was a predatory pattern of behavior that had been going on for years. The moment of truth came when Patricia pulled out her phone to take a selfie with her defeated victim. I want to document this moment for my records, she said, positioning herself next to my chair. This will serve as a reminder to future residents about the importance of respecting community standards. As she held up her phone, I stood up and smiled directly at the camera. Patricia Dorsey. I'm James Mitchell, and I'm a retired attorney who specialized in fraud prosecution for the state of Colorado. You've just confessed to multiple felonies while being recorded, and you're about to be arrested by real police officers. I was the state's hammer, Patricia, and you just rang the bell. The transformation in Patricia's face was instant and dramatic. The confident smile disappeared, replaced by a look of confusion and growing horror. What are you talking about, Tommy? Arrest this man right now. But Tommy was already removing his fake badge and stepping away from his mother. I'm sorry, Mom, but I can't do this anymore. Mr. Mitchell is right. What we've been doing is wrong. Patricia's eyes darted between me and her son, and I could see the exact moment when the reality of her situation finally sank in. You're a lawyer. That's impossible. You're just a retired old man. I explained to Patricia exactly what she'd done wrong, using the same patient tone. Manipulated utility companies through false pretenses, and hired your son to impersonate a police officer in Colorado. Those crimes carry a combined... The floor. This can't be happening, she whispered. I'm the HOA president. I have authority here. The sound of real police cars arriving outside was the sweetest music I'd heard in weeks. My detective friend had taken my email seriously and dispatched a team of state investigators to Pine Ridge. As the officers entered my cabin, Patricia made one last desperate attempt to maintain her fiction. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. This man has been threatening me and my son." And Patricia's performance only made things worse for her. "Miss Dorsa, you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, impersonation of a public official, and conspiracy to commit identity theft." Watching Patricia get handcuffed in my own cabin was one of the most satisfying moments of my retirement. As the officers led her away, she kept insisting that she was the victim, that me for doing my job. Her voice grew fainter as they guided her toward the patrol car, but her protest continued until the car door slammed shut. The officers took Patricia away, screaming, "You can't do this. I'm the HOA president. This is harassment." A week later, news broke statewide: fake HOA queen arrested in mountain scam. Victims from other towns started calling in. A class action was forming. Turns out Pine Ridge was just the latest stop in Patricia's little dictatorship tour. Tommy testified. He got probation, mandatory therapy, and surprisingly, a job offer from one of the actual deputies. "You've got a conscience, kid. That's rare." Tommy, meanwhile, was cooperating fully with the investigators, providing additional evidence and testimony that would ensure Patricia's conviction. The aftermath moved quickly. Within hours, my electricity and water were restored, and I received official apologies from both utility companies. The state attorney general's office launched a full investigation into Patricia's activities, and it turned out that her Pine Ridge scam was just the tip of the iceberg. She'd been running similar operations in at least 2 other communities, billing residents out of thousands of dollars in fake fines and fees. Tommy received probation in exchange for his cooperation, and I was told that Patricia would likely face significant prison time when her case went to trial. That night I sat on the porch again. Same chair, same coffee mug, but everything felt different. A family 2 cabins down waved as they walked their dog. One neighbor left me a jar of homemade apple butter. "You gave us our place back." I looked up at the stars then, over at the mantel where her photo still rested. "Told you I'd find peace." I murmured, "Just had to go through one more trial." The stars blinked silently. No sirens, no shouting, just mountain air and justice in the still. As I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sun set over the Colorado mountains, I reflected on the lessons of the past few weeks. Patricia Dorsey had made the classic mistake of underestimating her opponent and overplaying her hand. She'd assumed that everyone would be as passive and compliant as her previous victims. But she'd picked the wrong person to mess with. 20 years of legal experience had taught me that bullies and scammers always eventually overreach, and patience is usually the key to bringing them down. The mountains looked more beautiful than ever, and for the first time since moving to Pine Ridge, I felt truly at peace. There is a lesson in Patricia's downfall that applies to everyone who's ever faced a bully or a scammer. Sometimes the best response is to let them dig their own grave. Patricia's need for control and recognition ultimately led to her confession and arrest. If you're ever facing someone who's abusing their power or running a scam, remember that patience, documentation, and persistence are your best weapons. And if you're watching this from somewhere that you've dealt with your own HOA drama, let me know in the comments, because after what I've been through, I'm convinced that every neighborhood has its own Patricia Dorsey, and sometimes it takes a retired attorney to set things right.